Welcome back to another edition of Tips and Tricks. Today we're going to be taking a look at Ridgewalk and try to explain maybe one of its more confusing parameters and try to clear up anything that might be unclear with it. So today we're going to look at the overdub settings, and specifically we're going to compare the feedback overdub with the sidechain overdub style. Now, I'm going to set up a pretty basic Ridgewalk configuration where we record for 1 bar, and then we're going to play back the contents of the buffer forward for 1 bar. So we're basically going to get kind of like a granular echo of whatever we play into Ridgewalk. So I think that'll help us hear what's going on in the buffer. So I'm going to first show how the feedback overdub works. This is kind of like a traditional feedback or repeats style control, which is very similar to what you'd see in a delay or a looper. Basically, when we make a new recording, we're going to mix in the previous recording at the percentage volume that we've set here. So if we make one recording, if we make another recording, we're basically going to mix in the previous recording at 50% volume. And if we keep recording, we're going to hear that chord kind of start to disappear over time. So do you hear how that original chord is pretty much almost gone entirely? We can go back through the layers and restore it. But as we make new recordings, it kind of disappeared. So, the sidechain overdub style works a little differently. What we're basically going to do is, once we have a recording and we start a new recording, we are going to apply a sidechain compression against the original recording. So we're going to duplicate what we recorded, and then we are going to apply a sidechain compression via the new recording. So what that means is, if we record something that's louder, we're going to hear less of the original, and that process applies throughout the buffer. So if you play one note in a particular place in the buffer, it's going to duck whatever was in the buffer before. But if there's part of your recording which is closer to silent, the original is going to shine through. So this method is kind of nice for like really accumulating material and building up a buffer that's really dense. It kind of promotes a really full buffer over time. Let me kind of show you. Okay, so this first recording has a lot of content towards the front, but then it kind of peters out. Now what happens if we start a new recording. For the purposes of this, I'm going to exit auto recording. I'm just going to enter the classical recording mode, because if I were to record something based on the threshold, it would inherently have a lot of content at the start of the buffer. So I'm going to go into classic recording, and I'm just going to start it recording here. So you can hear how the original chord at the start of the buffer is pretty much unaffected. And I've kind of added this tail to the recording now. And we can keep contributing to it and kind of control where things are going to be removed and where they're going to be added. So you can already hear how this mode it really inherently kind of encourages you to create this really full buffer. I think this mode is really nice for kind of really accumulating material and creating just this really dense representation of all the audio that you've sent recently. And I also want to talk more about the difference between the recording modes. I mentioned briefly, but in auto recording, inherently you're going to have a lot of content towards the front of your buffer, because that's what's triggered the threshold and started the recording. So in this mode, it's actually, I think that the sidechain overdub style is actually often not the best, just because a lot of your content's going to be kind of in the same place in the buffer. But I think that it actually pairs really well with this classic recording mode, which you can actually just kind of keep, you can just leave it recording for as long as you want, basically. And it's not really going to do anything until you actually start recording. So let's start recording. And because this is just running, we're not really doing anything, we can start kind of placing things in the buffer where we want them to be. I think this recording mode is really nice if you kind of care about the sort of like the timing relationship between certain elements in the sound. Like you saw, this just kind of runs, and it's just recording 2 bars at a time. So if you kind of care about preserving, where notes and chords are relative to each other in those 2 bars, I think this is a great recording mode to consider. In the auto recording mode, you're always kind of starting from the front of the buffer. Let me just kind of demonstrate what I mean. So if I want to add to the end of this buffer, there isn't really a way to do that directly. I have to start recording, which is inherently going to start at the front of the buffer. You can kind of add something later on, but you could see that, I have to start recording, which starts recording from the front of the buffer. So this is more of the kind of like I don't care, I just want to record sound mode. But if you care more about, kind of adding things in a particular place in the buffer, I think classic recording is the solution for you. So I want to point out one other reason you might want to use the sidechain overdubbing. And that is when you're doing things with a little bit less kind of like standard harmonic or kind of diatonic content. Let me just show you what I mean. So if you're doing stuff with, say, a chord progression that borrows chords from different keys, maybe it's atonal, or maybe it is, you're just using some interesting chords, I'm going to just play an example of what that might sound like. So that's kind of all over the place with borrowed chords. And in this case, I think you want to be a little wary of using a feedback overdub. Let me show you why. I'm going to play two chords that kind of do not belong to the same diatonic scale. Got a buffer, that's this first chord, but then say I move to the second chord. Now, because we've mixed in 50% of the original layer, we've got a result that's pretty crunchy. We're kind of hearing both of these chords at the same time, and I don't think you necessarily want to do that. So in this case, the sidechain overdub is really your friend, because, as I mentioned before, we are going to remove content from the previous buffer based on what we are recording. So just to really exaggerate this, I'm going to turn up the sidechain all the way. And let's try that same example. And the next chord. That sounds much better to me. We've really successfully replaced what was in the buffer before. And I think this can be a really good move or something to be aware of, if you're working with things that are kind of more melodically complex. If you really want Ridgewalk to kind of if you wanted to just represent what was recorded recently more strongly, then I think this is the best overdub tool. You can also turn off overdub so that each layer is kind of just a completely fresh recording. You could also use the feedback overdub, but maybe turn it down by a lot. But these are all kind of tools in your tool belt. You can choose what fits your situation best. So, in summary, I would say that the sidechain overdub, which is a little bit less obvious why you would use it, is best for two usages in particular. The first is when you kind of care about preserving the timing relationship between things in the buffer. Actually, there's three things. So if you care about the timing relationship in the buffer, you probably want to use the Sidechain Overdub and classic recording mode. Secondly, if you want to create a really dense buffer over time, where, for example, maybe you're improvising on the keyboard, or you have a generative melody or something like that, and you just want to kind of let Ridgewalk accumulate all of these things over time. Maybe even if you want Ridgewalk to crescendo over time, the Sidechain Overdub is a great tool for that. And finally, if you're working with something that's maybe more melodically complex, and for example, when you move to a new key or a new chord, and you really want to knock out what was in the buffer before, the Sidechain Overdub is great for that as well. So there are 3 reasons that you might want to use the Sidechain Overdub, and I hope that clears up this recording technique.